The Mist is one of the most striking areas in Silksong. Or, well, I don't know if you could even call it an area. It doesn't ever get a map, the rooms constantly change, and after you successfully go through it, it disappears entirely. The Mist is more like a puzzle, in more ways than one. In order to get through it, you have to solve it first. Then, once you figure out the gimmick, you can make your way through. But the reality behind the Mist is just as much of a puzzle, one I intend to solve. So grab a snack, get cozy, and let's dive right into the fog. To answer the question of what is the Mist, we have to first answer some smaller questions. Those being, what are silkflies? Who and what is Sanctum? And finally, what are the Wraiths? Let's start with that first one. Silkflies are these little buggers, and they're not just found in the mist. They're everywhere, actually. They're in the environments acting as light sources and general ambience. They can be seen flying away when certain enemies are killed, and they're seen around certain significant characters or places. Anyone who's played the first 5 minutes of Silksong would be familiar with these little guys, yet we're not told anything about them. Not explicitly, anyway. We call them silkflies, but that's not because that's what they're called in the game. They don't have a hunter's journal entry or anything of the sort. The name silkflies comes from the game's files, which, to a casual player, would never be found. So, what's with these things? What are they? Well, we can find our answer in the very pleasant, very charming Whiteward. The Whiteward is, for lack of better words, the medical wing of the Citadel. It was where experiments with silk were conducted. Experiments that weren't entirely ethical. Hornet and the caretaker explain it to us. This is where bugs injected themselves and others with silk to extend life. So it stands to reason that if they were able to inject silk into themselves, they could extract silk. In a somewhat hidden room in Whiteward, there's a room with a plethora of rolling chairs and, at the end, a machine. We're never told what this ring of needles is, but again, the game files tells us it's the silk siphon. A siphon is a tube used to transfer liquid from a higher container to a lower container without a pump. But the word siphon can also be used as a verb, which then means to drain, withdraw, or bleed. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. If Hornet plays her needle in next to the siphon, the following dialogue can appear. To serve, beyond shell. To devote, eternal. Additionally, the following choral commandment can be found that says, Bug of voice-grown horse or shell fallen frail, you have been selected for duty most sacred. Become our light, our guide in darkness, that others worthy may climb to join the holy song. And finally, there's actually more to this room that I neglected to tell you about. If you continue going right, you'll stumble upon a room filled with corpses. If you haven't put the pieces together yet, let me say it plainly. The bugs of the Citadel who grew in age or sickness were sent to this room in Whiteward and, using the siphon, had their souls ripped out and turned into silk flies. All of those rolling chairs make a lot more sense now, don't they? But why silk flies? Why is that what they get turned into? Well, remember that dialogue between Hornet and the caretaker? The pilgrims who are subjugated to this machine were already infested with silk. Their innards, even their very souls, were entwined with it. That's why they're forced to sing and why we can see their thoughts and desires when Hornet plays her needle in, or when they hear music upon a silken thread. As for why this was done, well, I've kind of already given you that answer. Silk flies are used as light sources. They're used to guide in darkness. They're also used to power automatons. This is proven by the silk flies you can see flittering away when you break a Cogwork bug. When you defeat the 4th chorus, you can see dozens of them pouring out. And when the 12th architect dies, you can find a silk fly sitting atop their corpse. Not to mention all of the containers surrounding the 12th architect that match the same containers in that room in Whiteward. But there are other instances with the silk flies as well. There's one in the opening cutscene of the game who breaks the runes on Hornet's cage, which allows her to break free. More are seen near Lace, and there are plenty in the Mist. Those first 2 instances, the fly breaking the runes on Hornet's cage and the flies around Lace, are connected. We know that Lace wanted to kill Hornet before she could be taken to Grandmother Silk, so it stands to reason that Lace would want her freed. Her conducting or controlling the silk flies in Deep Docks confirms that she was the one behind it. So what about the silk flies in the mist? Why are they there? And why do they guide Hornet through when she plays her needle in near them? To answer that first question, I believe it's simply because the mist has a high concentration of silk. The silk flies are, when left alone, aimless. They gravitate towards things that are familiar or the same as them, that being either their prior vessels, like the instance with the silk fly on the top of the 12th Architect's body, or silk, like how they always fly upwards when broken free. They fly up towards the Citadel, or, more specifically, Grandmother Silk. As for why they guide Hornet through the mist, I believe that's because that is what Hornet wants. We already know the silk flies are impressionable and easily controlled. If Hornet plays her needle in outside of the mist, just near a group of silk flies, they will gravitate towards her and hover nearby. So, when Hornet plays her needle in the mist, her will, which is to get through the mist, is imposed on the silk flies. Therefore, they guide her to the right exit. Now that we've got the answers concerning the silk flies, let's turn our focus onto the one behind it all, Sanctum. Sanctum is a creature of silk created by Grandmother Silk. They were the first or one of the first ones created and were later discarded for some unknown reason. Grandmother Silk cast them down to the exhaust organ, where they have remained ever since, playing the organ to dispel the waste of the Citadel into what is now known as Bilewater. We don't know how long Sanctum has been in the organ, but it's obviously been a long time. Their Hunter's Journal entry says they are gray with age, and when you compare them to Lace, another silk child, you can see how much they've deteriorated. Even their mask is fraying to the point where they have to press it against their face during battle, and outside of battle they don't even wear it. In the journal, Hornet describes Sanctum as a mournful creature, followed by claiming that they welcomed a decisive end in combat over a slow decline. This is supported by their Needle-in dialogue, which says things like, "Show me strength, spider. Free me from this fading fate. Free me." All of this makes it obvious just how pained Sanctum is. They are constantly agonizing over their abandonment, and they resent their creation. In the exhaust organ, you can find a room with what looks like some sort of container or tube mechanism. Playing the needle in here reveals a memory between Sanctum and Lace. While it's unclear which one is speaking, the dialogue says things like, "She spun us to fade. She spun us to break. Why us, sister? Why us?" Questioning why they were created and claiming that it was only for them to fade and break. Yeah, it's pretty clear how they feel about their situation. The last thing I want to mention about Sanctum here is the boss fight. One of Sanctum's moves has them teleporting via clouds of mist, and as the fight progresses, the room will gradually fill with more and more mist. Keep this in mind, we'll come back to it in a moment. For now, let's turn our focus onto the last of the three questions, that being, what are the Wraiths? Wraiths are enemies found only in the mist. They're ghostly-looking beings that resemble Sanctum. Their Hunter's Journal entry claims them to be anguished specters of lingering thread and not a bug, but a projection of another's will cast in smog and silk. So, what does that actually mean? Let's start with this. Wraiths can't be killed. Their forms can only be dispelled for a short time, after which they'll reappear in their place in the mist. Makes sense if they're essentially ghosts. Another thing, they're hostile. When Hornet comes near, they'll scream and attack. If they manage to grab Hornet, they sap her silk. So what's with them? Why are they hostile? I've pretty much already given you the answer. Or more specifically, the game already has. The Wraiths are projections of Sanctum's will. We know it's Sanctum because 1, they look like them, and 2, they only appear in the mist, which is created by the exhaust organ, or, more specifically, Sanctum's playing of the organ. And reason number 3, they take Hornet's silk. In fact, that's their only attack. And what is said about Sanctum? They're a creature of silk, and they are decaying. They need silk. In fact, I'd say they're desperate for it. The journal says they essentially want to die, but underneath that I think is a hunger for silk, for what they've slowly lost over the years of slaving away in the organ. And that desire is reflected in these projections. So, essentially, the Wraiths are hostile because Sanctum is hostile. Simple enough, right? Well, we don't really know why they exist in the first place. There are plenty of anguished and hostile creatures in Silksong. Why is it that only Phantom gets physical manifestations of their will? It's all thanks to the mist. Do you remember what I said about how silk flies are drawn to places of silk? I said that because they fly upwards towards Grandmother Silk in the Citadel when broken free, but I also said that to explain why they're found in the mist, which, if you've been listening, has high concentrations of silk. But Livy, I hear you saying, mist doesn't have silk, it's just water in the air. And to that I say, my dear viewer, this is a fantasy bug world. It's not going to be realistic. And I also say, silk is everywhere in Farloom. You know Greymoor, the area that has constantly falling rain? Well, it's not just rain. Silk is mixed in. Silk, which is caught by the dread catchers. You can even see strands caught on their catchers when the enemies are idle, and you can see it on the spiked staffs everywhere. Silk is in the air like dust in an old room. It's the most plentiful in the Citadel, and what does the exhaust organ work for? It works to remove waste from the Citadel. It stands to reason that a lot of that waste would include silk. So, over the years, as the exhaust organ expelled waste into Bilewater, polluting it, the silk that was pumped out along with the toxins slowly congregated in the air of Sinner's Road, which eventually created the mist, which also attracted silk flies. That's all well and good, but then why is the mist so weird? Why the changing rooms? Why the wraiths? Silk has lots of unique properties. It can be used in spells and runes. It can be used in technology, but it is also tied to will. That's why Hornet can see lingering echoes in certain places when playing her needle-in. It's because the nearby silk is carrying those memories, those lingering desires. That's why all enemies and NPCs sing when they hear music upon silken thread, and it's why Hornet can hear their thoughts and desires when that happens. And that's why the mist is the way it is. It is a cloud of silk and smog, but it has also been imbued with Phantom's anguish. That's why the wraiths are there. If you're still struggling to wrap your head around this, let me put it this way. Phantom has been slaving away in the exhaust organ for years. They've been trapped doing the same thing over and over and over again. When Hornet is in the mist, she can go through rooms after rooms that repeat over and over, forever lost, forever trapped. See the connection? The mist is a physical manifestation of Phantom's pain. If you're still not convinced, then do you remember how mist will gather during Phantom's boss fight the longer it goes on? That could very well just be because all the mist and dust in the organ is getting kicked up during the fight. But Phantom can teleport, and whenever they do, there's a cloud of mist left behind. The connection is right there. And the final nail in the coffin, the mist disappears when Phantom dies. This could very well be because Phantom isn't there to play the exhaust organ anymore, but just because the organ stops dispelling waste doesn't mean all of the silk that's been pumped out over the years would suddenly disappear. If the mist were an independent area, it wouldn't disappear after Phantom dies. But it does, and that's because Phantom's the reason why it existed in the first place. So, there you have it! The mist is a congregation of silk in the air that slowly gathered and, as Phantom slaved away, became imbued with their will. The wraiths are a part of that will, and the silk flies were drawn there due to the high concentration of silk. One last tidbit about those silk flies. Silk flies are the souls of hundreds of bugs. Those flies, or those souls, in the mist are lost and disorganized. They just float there. But when Hornet comes along, she mobilizes them. Unites them. They guide her. They help her to, ultimately, bring down the citadel that reduced them to this form. Just like how she helps the pilgrim settlements. Just like how she inspires Sherma to take on an active role. Pretty deep, if you think about it that way. But anywho, there's your answer to what is the mist. Let me know your thoughts. Did I miss anything? Any details? Or maybe you have a different interpretation? And hey, don't forget about my Patreon in the description. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye!